Christian worldview and the historian. Applying a Christian worldview to the study of history goes beyond only biblical content research. Biblical worldview is the lens of certain uncompromisable truths that clarifies, not inhibits research and analysis of data. If a historian is a Christian, he or she should approach evidence and historical data with the biblical worldview, and yet being careful not to be trying to prove a certain agenda about God or the gospel. Going into research trying to prove a particular point always runs the risk of bias. This is the same reason that researching a historian's background is important when considering his or her historical analysis. It will help identify potential bias that author may have. Other methods have been utilized in the disciplines of studying history. For example, theology is another study that can be used by a historian. So there's different types of philosophies of history. So one would be the cyclical view, another would be the dominant philosophy. And if one is coming from a theological research, the Judeo-Christians didn't believe in the cyclical approach. They didn't believe that only history repeats itself, but that God actually intervenes into society and into the history that's being made. So God essentially makes history, and that is why it's not just a repeat. But that's not to say that the cyclical approach is wrong. It would just be that historians' particular view, and they would, I guess they would say that they were taking that approach. I wouldn't make it incorrect, for example. Another thing is that historians, coming from a Christian point of view, would have a slightly different timeline than someone coming from an evolutionist perspective. For example, the flood would be taken into account because that is part of the aging of the earth. And that is a fact that a Christian could include, that would clarify their research, that an evolutionist would choose to say the earth is old or appears old based on time instead of on a major flood. But this is just a disagreement. This does not make it any less true. It would just be a particular view and something to consider when you're reading his or her work.